This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation brought to you by the IVT Network. Across life sciences, teams concur that quality defined by safe, effective, and compliant products is a prerequisite of the pharmaceutical, biomedical, and medical device industries. The quality management system then provides the basic infrastructure needed for defining and validating the documents, the processes, procedures, and systems to meet the quality objectives of the company. The byproduct? Well, of course, that's the highest customer and patient satisfaction along with the best products. So today, we will discuss the essentials for building a culture of quality while achieving customer satisfaction with our industry expert and very special guest, Kate Coleman. So welcome, Kate. It's great to have you here with us today.
Hi, Stacey. I'm delighted to be here to answer any questions you might have today.
Absolutely. QMS and QMS systems and software are things that a lot of our audience members are used to thinking about, used to talking about, in that they are an essential part of doing business in the life science industry. But it's not always clear which systems are the best ones, what are the pros and cons of different types of systems and different types of software. So we'll dive into some of that today. QMS software and systems, are not new. In fact, the FDA did release guidance in 2014 to address the varying QMS systems and softwares being used, and pointed out that well-built quality systems should reduce the number of, or better yet, prevent recalls, returns, or salvaged product and defective products entering the marketplace. So with that in mind, what's changed since 2014, and why are we having this conversation today, Kate?
I suppose one of the first reasons we're probably having this conversation is that as an industry, we haven't got to zero, defects, zero recalls. We still need to manage quality. And although there's been lots of change in the industry over the last number of years, in 2015, we've had updates in the EU in particular, and in the US, we've had updates to guidances. Some of the expectations have, changed a little bit in terms of having, a really risk-based approach so that we can, and as they say, foresee our problems and prevent them from happening. And we're still in the infancy of actually being able to do that. So quality management systems have to, they have to meet the baseline requirements. So whether they are an electronic system, whether it's a paper-based system, it still needs to meet that basic, need to control all of the elements that impact a product. One of the big things with that, I suppose, it's happened over the last couple of years. We are increasingly online. We have lots of, systems that are cloud-based quality management systems that you can tap into. And we've become quite focused on the QMS system as an electronic tool, or which type do you use. But I think in order to really get back to basics, we need to think about, well, what is the quality management system supposed to do? What is it supposed to achieve? And we'll always talk about this until we get everybody on the same page. And as I said, we've zero deviations, zero recalls, zero defects. Bit of a blue sky way of thinking about it, but that's what we're trying to achieve.
Right. Absolutely. That is the ultimate goal. And as you mentioned, we're just not there yet. And I'm not sure if we ever will be, because there's always other factors. There's human error, and there's, system glitches and things like that. But of course, we want to get as close to that as possible. Do you have any ideas on, you mentioned whether you're using a manual system or using electronic system. And I know that the World Health Organization, as well as the European guidance on that, is really asking folks to not use hybrid systems if they can help it. So really to move mostly to digital systems. Do you think that this is going to help us in this effort to reduce our recalls and our errors or bad products that are being sent out into the marketplace?
I think we have to be a little bit cautious in terms of not putting too much responsibility on technology, because for any of our systems, the information, it's like anything, the data going in, the judges whether or not the data coming out is all going to be of sufficient quality. So if you've got if you're a small pharmaceutical company, or you're setting up and you've got a paper system and it's a brilliant paper system and it works and everybody follows it, then when you put it into the electronic platform, it's going to be a good quality management system in the electronic platform. But if your quality management system is very, if it's very complex, needlessly complex, if it doesn't meet the basic needs of a quality management system, then if you go from a manual system into the electronic system, it's still going to be cumbersome and difficult. And one of the things that we find a lot with, our clients and across the industry is that a lot of companies get themselves into the position where it's become overly complex. It's become very burdensome. And as it's interesting, you mentioned, procedure non-compliance or human error. And generally the human error, from the examples we see, it's not that nobody goes to work every day and wants to make a mistake. But what happens is the systems and the processes don't have the clarity, or they don't speak to people in terms of the, being able to learn things. Maybe the way that something is delivered is not visual enough, or it's too wordy, or it's not clear. So I think quality management systems and how they're designed, maintained, and how they're kept up to date is, whether they're paper, whether they're electronic, it's making sure that it serves its purpose and in a very simple way, as simple as you can, so that the basic principles aren't lost, and that we don't focus again on the tools and the platforms, but we focus on what it's trying to achieve.
Great reminder, Kate, where, more is not always better. So I want to talk a little bit too about, this mind shift. We're hearing a lot in industry today about building a culture of quality, and shifting from the mindset of it's QA or QC's department or job to ensure quality, to this more team approach style of thinking, where it's everyone's responsibility to certify quality. Why is this an important distinction?
But if you think of it in context of a quality management system, where a quality management system is supposed to span all of your operations to make sure your product at the end is of the required level of quality, then it makes sense that you can't have just one part of your quality management system controlling all that. And it's the same with your organization, where one of the things I say sometimes to people, either I'm training or that I'm interacting with, is we are a high impact industry. No matter what way you look at it, we make medicinal products. What we do is always going to be a high impact. So if you've got a very large organization, you cannot put all the responsibility just on the shoulders of, the people in your quality organization. Everybody needs to understand that every part of their daily, the set of activities can potentially impact the product at the end of the day. And everybody needs to own the responsibility for that. We are all a collective. There's, I don't like this tiered system where, there's different levels within an organization. At the end of the day, the patient is the most important person. Getting them the product that works and that doesn't, cause them any harm. That's our goal. And everybody that has any sort of impact on that needs to take responsibility for that, because it can be one little thing in the chain can knock it all down. So, if everybody understands their responsibility, then naturally you become responsibility for quality in your part of that puzzle. And I think that's why it's so important.
Yeah, I totally would agree. And I think that the more that this happens, the better the quality, not just of the product, but of your team and your entire organization. We see that go up. And to your point, I want to talk a little bit more about the quality systems and the benefits to the patient. Quality systems, as you've mentioned, can look different across different organizations, right? And they can be customized to fit the specific environments, allowing for differences in scope of operations, complexities of processes, and appropriate use of limited resources. So this is important to the facility or to the manufacturer, of course. But why is this also a win for the patient or the consumer?
So I suppose one of the big wins, obviously, is the fact that you're going to get a quality product. And if you've got a good quality system, then, a lot of the time your reputation as a manufacturer is going to be based on the fact that you do things well. Sometimes we lose our way a little bit with that, where we think doing it well is making it complex. But when you break a quality system down into its parts, and you particularly mentioned it at the start around, each quality system element, the purpose of it really is to make sure something bad doesn't happen again. So if you look at your deviations, which is one of the main parts that goes across every single quality system, the deviations, the whole point of it is to find a root cause for an issue and put in the right corrective action and preventative action that prevents that happening again. So even from a consumer and cost perspective, if you're fixing all your problems, ideally, you're finding them in quality risk management before they occur and you don't have the deviation. But then when you do have the deviation, if you've solved that properly, you shouldn't have that deviation again. And you shouldn't have all of your resources tied up in trying to manage deviations and CAPAs. And then that does have an impact on the bottom line on the company as well. So, being able to get the product onto the market quickly as well. We're now seeing a shift where, before historically we'd be used to products that, if something happens, the QP just rejects the batch and there's no impact to the patient doesn't even know. But when you go into things like, and I would have worked in, orphan drugs previously, and when you look at ATMPs where the batch size are very small, we can't afford to do that anymore. So what the patient impact can be if your quality management system doesn't control your quality, prospectively rather than retrospectively, then you could have a patient sitting in a clinic waiting for an ATMP or waiting for a biological drug because they have an orphan disease. And if you don't have that product in a desired level of quality to get it to them, they're sitting there waiting for it and they're not getting treated. And
Right.
Sometimes those diseases mean that if the patient doesn't get that treatment, they will deteriorate until their next dose or until you can give them that dose. So you're impacting them. So it's about not just getting it out with the required quality, but also realizing that we don't have a lot of raw material to play with in some of those products. And that's important to realize.
Absolutely. Great point. Thinking back to the quality of culture, and you just mentioned the proactive versus reactive a little bit. And as we talk about deviations and CAPAs and all of that, and of course, those things need to happen when there are errors or the quality is not where you need it to be. But we're trying to move away, it seems, from CAPAs and as much as we can by placing a greater emphasis on proactive approaches to quality and risk management, as opposed to those types of reactive approaches. So encouraging a dedication to continuous improvement in processes and procedures, thereby building the quality into the product. How does a robust QMS system support this type of proactive thinking, proactive activity?
Well, I suppose it starts with your quality risk management program, which, is a very obvious answer. And what we've seen across the industry is that we're not mature as an industry in terms of how we implement that. Again, some of the basic principles have been lost, where you need to go down through your processes and you need to just, show how they fail and be able to put robust controls in place. I think sometimes we're not probably open as an industry because we know there's maybe issues there and we kind of go, oh, look, if I score this as a high risk, I'm going to have to do something about it. And we don't always be completely objective in how we do it. So that's number one, is really objectively looking at what are the things that are really a risk, getting the right people in place who can help you do that assessment, and then using those documents. So every time you're going to make a change or every time you have an issue, you go back to that risk assessment and say, did we know that this was going to happen? If we didn't, how did we miss it? Did our controls fail us? If they did, what went wrong? So that is really a proactive approach to make sure that you're capturing things and having controls in place. But also we talk about deviations and CAPAs, and something else we see a lot, and to any of the listeners, maybe ask yourself this question. If you have a lot of deviations, you have to ask, are your CAPA actions actually working? So are you just finding a root cause as procedure non-compliance and then just putting in a CAPA to update the procedure? It's a little bit one of my pet hates. You might find an error in one procedure and you might say that that's the subject of that deviation. But if your trend is that it's procedure non-compliance is your biggest issue, then why are your procedures not working? Go a bit deeper, go deeper, but also look at the systemic issue. Look at overall, if we've lots of procedure non-compliances, something is wrong with how we're delivering the information and something's happening with how we're training to it. If you
and they're
cut
not
all
really
that,
getting to the root cause. When we see that happen again, right? They're
not.
not really defining the reason. They're just
Yes.
kind of putting a Band-Aid on it and moving on.
And we've gotten into this habit probably of being, you know, with kappa, for example, we all talk about kappa, 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 but we don't always break it down and really think about the fact that the C in kappa is corrective. So it's what we fix right at this moment. But the preventative is saying, well, could something similar like this happen? And that's where you should be looking at your overall quality management system to see, is it robust? There's a difference in those things. And if we only address the corrective, then of course the issue is going to happen again, but it's just going to happen with another procedure. So we really just have to interrogate, are we really, you know, are we really delivering the point of the quality management system element, or are we just, you know, biding time, ticking the boxes, following, you know, the form, whether it be electronic or whether it be manual? Are we really thinking about how we fix things? So when we give deviation training, we talk about, are you recording, which is part of it, but are you recording and resolving? And I think it's the resolving piece that we don't always pay attention to.
Yes, very good, very good. And I would agree. I mean, it all starts with a proper risk assessment. And I think when, as an industry, we can move beyond this fear of the risk assessment, beyond this fear of naming where our risks are, where our weaknesses are, and embrace them and say, listen, we've identified these risks. That's a good thing, because now we can dive in and remediate those proactively before, you know, they become an issue down the road. So
if you think about it, you've actually got two sides of the coin. When you've got quality risk management, you're looking at the things that could go wrong before they go wrong, and then you're fixing them if you're doing it properly. And then you've also got this like backup safety net of, okay, when something does go wrong, we've our deviation system. So whatever went wrong, you go back to that risk assessment. You say, well, what controls did we have? Where did those controls go wrong? And then you put in a kappa action that corrects that issue, but also corrects it and prevents it from happening again. So you've actually got this twofold, you know, system to make sure something doesn't happen again. So it always makes me wonder when people say, oh yeah, you know, our quality risk management and our deviation system, they work really well. I'm like, okay, show me that you've zero deviations. Because until you've zero deviations, they're not working as well as they should be.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So thinking about some of the tools that are out there now, Kate, you know, the digital tools that are more readily available, we're starting to see that, you know, silos of ownership are starting to be dismantled, allowing for more collaboration, as we've talked about, and, you know, that team approach to quality. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about employee engagement here and getting the teams to really buy into this concept that it's everyone's responsibility, and here's the tools to help us.
Yeah, it's a tough question, because some of the tools, you know, the way that the workflow works, it can be quite departmental focused. But then on the positive side, you know, it allows you to work on these things together wherever you are, because a lot of them are cloud-based, and that's always a good thing. Whereas historically, at the start of my career, I remember was, you know, going around with a colored piece of paper, and it was colored so it wouldn't get lost on somebody's desk, and then somebody was blamed for losing it or holding on to it. So it does keep us much more aligned in terms of how we're filling things in and how we're sitting down and entering information. It means that we can do it from wherever we are. And that's all good. But again, it's just a tool for getting people to buy in. And it's like anything, they need to know what the benefits are. So if you're somebody who's, you know, working 24/7 shifts to manufacture, you know, a product that goes to patients, you need to, as a company, make that patient very close to that person in terms of visibility. So who are the patients that you're actually providing this product for? And not just, you know, can be a little bit of it can be a bit of motivation, but it's not the only thing. So if you've got, again, somebody at 5 o'clock in the morning and they have to do deviations in order to meet your 30-day timeline, then you need to be encouraging them to actually, and give them the systems and tools to do proper root cause analysis, do proper kappa plans, so that you can nearly guarantee them they're not going to have to do this every night on every shift, that you are reducing the numbers. So there has to be a win for the person who's trying to manage these quality management systems, as well as then a win for the patient, and an awareness of the purpose of all of this. I think sometimes we don't train to the purpose and we don't follow through. We don't deliver on the purpose. And I use deviations as an example regularly because it's really one that's tangible. So,
Right.
Recalls and defects and anything like that is the same. And regulatory compliance also has a real benefit. It can be harder to make that tangible, but it is the reason someone has a job, is because that, that facility is licensed and they've got a license to manufacture product. And there are companies that get into the situation where that's under threat, and that's when your job's under threat. So it's understanding those things, and again, using those digital tools as a way to make all of that easier.
Fantastic. And then of course, how does this all relate to that elevated customer experience? Because I know that your team spends a lot of time working with organizations, not just on managing those processes and procedures within their organization, but really helping to provide a better customer satisfaction rate. So if you can just briefly talk about how all of this relates then to an elevated customer experience.
I think the first thing you kind of have to recognize is who are the customers, because there's many different types of customers. Like ultimately it's the patient, we know that. And all they want is good quality product. They want access to the product, and they want the product to be available. But we also, like, if you're a CMO listening to this, your customers are the other clients. They might be, entrepreneurial companies, startups that need to use your facilities. You need to show that your level of quality compliance will match their targets so that you can get a product to the market without any hiccups, without any issues. So in order to be able to show that, you use the strength of your quality management system. Any other contract organization, CROs, contract labs, all have to they have different customers as well. And another customer of ours is the regulatory bodies as well, and the regulatory inspectors. So we need to be able to demonstrate to them that they can trust us. And one of the things that you can really use your quality management system for, and it's probably something people don't always think about, is that if you show through your quality management system you're aware of your problems and you have a plan and you're fixing them, they appreciate that so much more than hiding things. Right. So if you're using your quality management system properly, as a customer, you're building their trust. So then, they're happy that you're following the regulations, and that, again, they're using risk-based audit approaches, and you want to be on the list of low risk for them. So there's multiple different customers, and the quality management system is a way of demonstrating that, number one, you take your problems seriously. You've got the patient as the focus of your organization rather than anything else. And that you're committed to delivering product both on time so that patients have access, but also to a level of quality that they can trust. And I think we've really seen that with social media over the COVID-19 pandemic, how easy it is now for people to get information about different companies and how they'll use that information to make decisions on, what they will accept in terms of treatment and what drugs they will take. So again, having a good reputation and a quality management system that delivers that and helps that is so important when information is so readily available.
Yeah, so very well said, because we have seen, that there is more and more information really at the customer's fingertips. Yeah. Not just COVID, but, for the past decade, we've seen it, the pendulum swinging, right? Mm-hmm. So the customers are really the ones in control now, more so than ever. And it's really important that we're not only transparent, but that we're putting out good information, good product, and maintaining their trust.
Yeah, like I've never spent so much time talking to friends and family who are not scientists or don't have a basis in the pharmaceutical industry, and they're talking to me now about clinical trials, and they've heard this out of this clinical trial, and what does this mean? And it just shows that even with patient-centric medicine and personalized medicine, this is actually not going to go away just because the COVID-19 pandemic may go away, hopefully. But, this is the age that we're in now. People can get this information. And one of the things is that people can misconstrue information. So you have to make sure that you can 100% stand over the integrity of all of the information and the systems that you have, so that the patient, as well as everybody else, can trust what you're making.
Yeah, I would agree, Kate. I think this is only the beginning. COVID has kind of lit this fire, but it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
Thinking about technology a little bit, because we are moving to a much more digital space throughout the industry in all areas. of the life cycle. And technology really allows for much more intuitive, data-driven QMS systems. There are, of course, challenges in making a shift to some of these new technologies. And I was hoping that you could talk about some of the biggest hurdles or some of the biggest challenges out there right now that are kind of in the way of, for some organizations trying to make this shift.
Yeah, so in terms of technology, the sky is the limit in terms of what you can do, and particularly like trending and things like that can be literally at your fingertips, and that's brilliant to try and see things before they happen, and that's great. But as you said, there are challenges with that. So one of the challenges is data integrity is a big one, obviously. We've seen all of the hacking scandals that have happened over the last couple of years where, there's data and having issues with corruptions of systems, making sure that your servers are secure. So that's all the real IT side. We see it with cloud-based systems in particular, because you may have a server in another country that's being shared, if you're on a specific platform, and you have to do your due diligence with them to make sure that your data is secure. Sometimes, particularly coming from the more traditional QMS, that can be a minefield of trying to make sure that all of this is okay. And making sure that you have, your different levels of access, that you have all of that identified. You can end up with layers and layers of complexity, but that's where, I suppose, getting experts in place that can help with that are really important. Also, I think the other thing we have to, maybe it's a little bit left field, but something we have to be careful of, and I've kind of been talking to this throughout our chat, is that we are so used to things online and digital platforms being transactional. We're so used to it being, I'll press a button and I get a result. We're very used to scrolling through, skim reading, not going through things in detail. Some of us that are a little bit older like still to print out stuff, so that because we feel like we're going through it in more detail. So I think that's one of the challenges as well, is bringing everybody on the journey that electronic is okay, but also how do you make sure that we don't get into those bad habits that we would get in with our mobile phones, for example, that we do actually review everything in detail and we think about how is this serving our purpose. The other thing that we've found a lot as well working with clients is that the development of the design of a quality management system or element of a quality management system that's, digital, is that you have to remember that it's only as good as how you've designed it. You have to really think about the design. And yes, there's off-the-shelf providers for things, but you still need to work through your workflow with them and design it so that you don't end up with dead ends, that, you have to have 3 or 4 signatures where you don't need them, and that you have a real balance between what's required from a compliance point of view and what may be overly conservative methodologies for putting things in place. One of the ones we see a lot is where there's multiple signatories when you don't actually need it. So trying to get a record through a system can be impossible. So there's lots of these different types of issues that you really need to just think about how you're going to design it. How is it going to work? How would it work if it was paper? And then bring that onto the electronic system and take all the benefits of the electronic system without losing the purpose.
Absolutely. So thank you for covering some of those, because we continue to see those challenges, of course, across industry. And there are questions that these organizations have as they navigate their way, towards zero deviation, zero findings. And regulatory compliance, really remains a top concern for organizations, not only because they don't want to have findings or get warning letters, but because every one of us is striving to produce the highest quality products, as you've already mentioned several times during this. But do you think that all of this, if we have an effective and efficient QMS system in place, do a lot of these regulatory compliance issues kind of become a moot point?
No, again, I think, these systems have been in place for a long time. We still have issues. There's nothing that is going to do the work for us, I think is the point. Everything is a tool. It's a tool for us to use, but if we use it it's again, I bring it back to everyday life. It's like social media, it's like the internet. They're tools to get information, to analyze information, to get information out, but they, you know, they can still be used in the incorrect way that will lead to you having an observation. And we see a lot of observations around automation as well, you know, where you're using a software provider for a particular quality system element, and maybe there's an update and there's not a proper risk assessment done. You don't know how it's impacted the other parts of the electronic system. So in some ways, it's actually become a little bit more complicated. You know, if you have any sort of electronic system, whether it be a spreadsheet or something very bespoke and complex, you know, you need to make sure that it's meets GAMP, you know, GAMP5 guidance, that you have it assigned into the proper category, that you assign the correct validation to it, that you have the right level of controls. So I think the observation types might change. You know, whereas, you know, 30 years ago, you might have an observation that you couldn't read a deviation because of somebody's handwriting. Now you might have an issue where you haven't reviewed an audit trail and realize that there's been input into the system that you haven't accounted for. That happens in laboratories all the time. You know, the FDA have done a huge amount of work and, you know, on data integrity, and some of their inspection techniques, you know, are really to be commended in terms of how they've trained themselves up to be able to deep dive into laboratory systems, for example, and find where people have been running maybe HPLC runs or something else that they haven't recorded. So one set of problems can replace another. And we still, again, need to be very clear on what the basics are, that everything needs to be documented, everything needs to be resolving, and that our goal is to reduce the problems from and prevent them happening before they occur. And if we fail in that, then getting to the proper root cause and making sure that we fix it once it's happened. So I think the principles remain the same. We just replace the types of observations that we would get.
Excellent. Thank you. So, you know, throughout the theme here, in addition to the quality management system and the quality of the product, really has been customer satisfaction. We've mentioned it a few times. And of course, anyone in business understands that that is a critical part of operations. So how are customers impacted today by quality management, and how does it aid in meeting customer requirements of tomorrow?
Okay, this is an interesting question, because up to today, and probably, you know, we're talking a little bit in the past here. So your quality management system was the thing that made sure that your product was consistent, you know, that it didn't have any contamination in it, that it was going to do what it said it did, and that it was manufactured by your standard process that's in your marketing authorization, that's been validated and everything else. Where we're starting now to shift a little bit is, you know, with novel medicines, particularly where there's small batch sizes, you're not going to be able to test. We've been very, very reliant on, oh, well, look, if something happens, if we have a deviation, we can test and we can make sure that it meets the specification, particularly around things like sterility assurance. This has become an issue. But now with the more novel medicines, you're not going to be able to wait 2 weeks. You know, there's some ATMPs where you only have a window of 48 hours from production to getting it into the patient. You're not going to be able to do all your testing in that time. So if your quality management system, and particularly things like quality risk management, are not up to scratch, how are you going to stand over the quality of your product if you're not constantly monitoring the quality from the point of raw material in to product out? How are you going to do that if the quality system is clunky and if it's, you know, too difficult to manage? You need it to be slick. It needs to be dynamic. You need to be able to prove the product quality as you go through the process. And then if you get to test at the end, then that's the icing on the cake. But we need to be more dynamic than that now as we kind of go into the next phase of development of the types of therapies that we're delivering to patients.
Thank you so much for that. That was, I mean, for this entire discussion, so many, you know, thought-provoking and relevant points brought up. And I really appreciate that. Before we, or as we get ready to wrap up today, Kate, I just want to see if you have any additional thoughts or ideas that you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
I suppose, and you said it probably at the start about making things simple. I suppose one of the things that, you know, again, we do see is, particularly like the older, more established organizations, sometimes they can have blind spots because they've got these huge systems and, you know, they feel that they're really, you know, they've got everything in place. But sometimes, and this happens with small industry as well, sometimes we need to actually take time, line in the sand, and say, are they really serving the purpose? Are we making it too complicated? Because I think that's where sometimes we find the issues, is we've made such a big beast out of the quality management system, and we have waste in it and things that have developed over years, that it fails to be dynamic and agile. And I really think as we go forward into, you know, the next decade and century, that we're going to need to be so dynamic and agile. So even if you think your quality management system is well established and runs well, really interrogate and ask, is it just a recording mechanism? Are we fixing issues? Do we have zero deviations? Do we have zero observations? You know, what could we do to make it more agile and more dynamic? I think quality people in particular need to think about this, that it's, you know, it's not, when we're in quality now, it's not just a matter of making sure that we are, you know, compliant with every regulation. It's also, are we compliant with regulation in a way that's efficient so that all the patients can get the products, but that the manufacturers can, again, as I say, be agile and dynamic and have the room to do this more prospective assessment rather than always trying to be getting out and getting ahead of the churn.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, you know, I'm just thinking about all that you're saying, and I'm just like, well, we can't rest on our laurels. You know, sometimes we think if we get this mature quality management system in place, and then it will just sort of run itself. But really that's, you know, that's only a tool, and the tools need to produce what we intend them to produce. And we need to interact with them the way that we need, you know, whatever, to meet the processes and the procedures and the products and all of the things that we need to do. And we can't just ever just assume that that's going to happen on its own. It's, you know, there's certain things we can automate, but it's always going to need a high level of oversight to
always. And like the way I look, it's like people. I just, when you say, you know, a system maturing, then they're like, as people mature, if they mature well, they drop all the stuff that they don't need as they mature, and they start focusing on the things that matter, and whatever that might be to every person. And a quality management system in a plant is like a living and breathing thing. We start off thinking we know what it needs, and we develop it and we add things over the years. And then as it develops and becomes more mature, we have to help the quality management system recognize, well, what do I not need anymore? What can I drop so that I can really focus on the important things that actually will affect product quality? So think of it like a person like that. You know, as it matures, you have to drop things in order to keep it dynamic and keep it current and relevant as well.
Great final points to leave our listeners with. Kate, it's been great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for taking some time.
Thanks so much, Stacey. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for giving me the time.
Absolutely. It was fantastic. Really appreciate all your insights and accounts on this topic. And I also want to give a shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen. And most importantly, sending out many thanks to you, our valued listeners. We truly appreciate your time each week and your help in sharing this podcast. Together, we continue to spread the word. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to subscribe in your podcast player of choice, and be sure to share it with your friends, colleagues, and online networks so they can enjoy it too. Plus, send us a quick note or leave an online review. We really appreciate your feedback. For show notes and additional podcast resources, including the links to a couple of quality documents in this episode, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com/podcast. We'll be back again next week with another informative and timely discussion. Until then, make it a great week.